This is Wanindu Hasaranga. He's really good at taking wickets. You have seen him do this for Sri Lanka or in the IPL. He captains his nation and he's a pretty well-known cricketer. And in 2024, he was the world's equal leading wicket taker for one-day internationals. None of this is surprising. He is very good at hitting the stumps. And you look at this list and there are some incredible players who've ended up with the most wickets in a calendar year for ODIs. Joel Garner, Kapil Dev, Curtly Ambrose, Waqar Younis, Wasim Akram, Sukley Mushtaq, Shane Warne, Sean Pollock, Urali, Brett Lee, Shakib Al Hasan, Mitch Starc, and Lasif Malinga. That is some list. That is like many of the greatest white ball bowlers we have ever had. And Hasaranga is obviously not quite on some of their level, but there are others who are in this list who aren't even anywhere near as good as him. They're just players who played a lot that year or perfected a good slower ball for a time. Ajanta Mentis took the title once by inventing a whole new method of bowling and then kind of disappeared completely. Hasaranga is a long way from the worst or even the most random on this list. But clearly, he did it in a year where not that many bowlers actually took wickets. His 26 is one of the lowest totals ever. But remember, I said equal leading wicket taker. And the other player who took 26 ODI wickets is far less famous. In fact, if you know him at all, it's probably from T20. And even then, it's doubtful if you'd know who he was. If you've seen him in ODIs, you're in a very small cult known as associate hipsters. Those of us who search high and low for random streams. I call him Big Dill, but I don't think anyone else does. He is Dylan Hailiger, the Canadian strongman who destroys on associate wickets that are often up and down with his muscular back-of-a-length bowling. Of all the players ever to take the most wickets in a year of ODIs, Big Dill would have to be close to the oddest. But that is what ODIs are like now. Next on the list is Aaron Dutt, the young Dutch off-spinner. So what does this all mean? Well, essentially, the world's 3 leading ODI wicket takers from last year are not going to be at the Champions Trophy this year. Do you want AMAs to connect on live calls with me or engage with our dynamic Discord community? Maybe you want ad-free content, early podcast episodes, or to stay informed through my emailer. Well, if you support us on Patreon, you get all of that plus a little bit of behind the scenes, how the sausage is made stuff. Our deepest thanks go to everyone who has supported us on Patreon so far, but the more people who do means the more content we can make. I'm currently commentating on the India-England series for TalkSport, which made me think about how many ODIs some of these players are actually around for. So for the Cricketer magazine, I actually looked into ODIs in 2024, and it didn't take very long. Australia played 11 of them. That is the 9th most of any team. And the only side with more who's actually going to the Champions Trophy is Afghanistan. And yet they only played 14 matches. Sri Lanka had 18 games in 2024, which would have been the 14th most in 2023. In fact, the teams who combine for more than half of the ODI games played in 2024 only have one side who's actually going to be at the Champions Trophy. Sides will line up as many ODIs as possible in and around World Cup years, but otherwise, ODIs now kind of barely exist. And while the ICC wants the Champions Trophy to be like the Euros, in truth, it's about as minor as any major trophy can be. ODIs have disappeared a little bit in the last few years, but this graphic doesn't quite show that. And the reason for that is there is a lot more teams now that have ODI status. So if you go to Cricinfo or CricBuzz at any time, there's almost always like Canada or the USA or the UAE or Namibia playing some sort of an ODI series. So the amount of ODIs has stayed almost similar to previous levels. It's just that the teams who are doing it are Canada and the Netherlands. But even then, 104 ODIs is not a lot. And we have had small years before, like during COVID. But the real pattern is that in the 12 months after a World Cup, teams just kind of give up on ODIs altogether. You could see that pattern starting in 2012. The same happened for 2016, 2020, although that one was COVID assisted, and now 2024. Basically, the death of bilateral ODIs happens when T20 cricket starts to take over, which makes a lot of sense. So the years that take the biggest hits are the furthest from the next 50 over World Cup. From a planning standpoint, that makes a lot of sense, right? Focus on other forms of cricket and then slowly ramp back up as the main trophy comes around. But the big change is that in the old days, the ODIs were the cash cow. And so it didn't matter if there was a World Cup coming or not. You simply had to fit in that 7-match bilateral series. And our entire game has changed since then. Take Virat Kohli. He will go down as one of the greatest ODI batters of all time. Yet, even while his career is ongoing, The games are seemingly drying up around him. 3 matches last year is an incredible drop-off. His form is the most discussed in the world right now. And I have no idea how he's going in 50 over cricket because he doesn't play it much. This Champions Trophy is a complete afterthought for most teams. And how could it not be? We had our last one 8 years ago. It has changed names, been cancelled, and also just ignored. There is a whole generation of cricket fans who don't even know why we go on about white jackets. There is still a very small, passionate fan base that absolutely loves this tournament. But most fans around the world just kind of shrug their shoulders about its very existence. The players also don't really rate it. The ones who talk it up are usually the ones who've had like a career highlight in it. Australia basically ignored the Champions Trophy for generations, winning everything else except this tournament like a passive-aggressive shadow ban. The ICC wants this to be the Euros of cricket. It's more like the Commonwealth Games. On an episode of Crick Pricks recently, we went through the winning Pakistan team from 2017. And I was shocked that Azhar Ali was on the list. I covered that match. I covered that entire tournament. I covered most of Pakistan's games. Now, my memory shouldn't be used as evidence or anything, but it's not a great sign, is it? On top of all that, there was a fairly persistent rumor that this tournament was going to be T20. That never happened, but it is much more likely to be 20 overs than 50 when we get to 2029. Although knowing world cricket, the entire trophy could be cancelled, renamed, or delayed from that year as well. Yet somehow the Champions Trophy will survive. They should replace the trophy with a golden cockroach, because this thing can survive anything. And maybe the T20 rumours had something to do with the fact that the main teams couldn't even be bothered warming up for this edition. I mean, India isn't even going to Pakistan. The hosts forgot to put their squad together for 3 weeks. 7 teams are coming into this ICC trophy with pretty much no experience in the format recently. And you might be thinking, well, that is fine. They play enough white ball cricket. But the English players before the last 50 over World Cup said they were struggling with the different tempos and skills needed for the longer format of the game. Players from other countries have often mentioned this as well. For this Champions Trophy, New Zealand will have prepared by playing 3 matches last year and another 3 so far this year. And of course, they'll play some warm-up games. In 2024, they used 13 players. 5 of them are in their Champions Trophy squad. India also played 3 ODIs in 2024. England, only 8. And you would think with England touring India for a white ball series a few weeks before the Champions Trophy, they would play like a lot of one-day internationals. Or at least more 50 over cricket than 20. Instead, it is 3 ODIs and 5 T20 internationals. It's like they are actively taking the piss out of the ICC. And not just them, but pretty much all the teams who have qualified for the Champions Trophy are actively trolling the ICC by avoiding the format. Maybe they thought it would be T20 as well. And when you look at the star players, it isn't like they're off playing one-day domestic cricket in their spare time. Those leagues are almost entirely made up of journeymen or youngsters. It's very rare to see a big star go back and play more than 1 or 2 games a year for their local team. Think about England. For them to win the Champions Trophy, Joe Root is probably going to have to make a lot of runs, especially based on how their team's been playing spin bowling recently. Well, his last ODI was in the 2023 World Cup. Up until the start of 2022, Root was averaging over 50 in one-day internationals. Since then, he's only played 19 matches while going at an average of 23. We know how talented he is, but even he struggled with just the lack of games. It is simply very hard to be good at ODI cricket when you don't play it. The good news for Root, and pretty much everyone else, is that almost all the players are in the same boat. The Champions Trophy is meant to celebrate the best ODI teams. The ICC bang on about it every time this tournament turns up, when they don't ignore it or cancel it. Yet these best of the best teams honor the ICC by barely playing the format. If you like the Champions Trophy, pop on your white jacket, as it may be the last one like this. If you don't like it, don't worry. Feels like the boards feel exactly the same way. South Africa did not choke. In 1906, South Africa needed 284 to win. They'd only passed 100 in half their test innings at that point. At 105 for 6, it seemed impossible. They fought back but lost another flurry, leaving 45 to win with 1 wicket in hand. At the crease was Dave Norse, who was a capable batter, and he was joined by Percy Sherwell, the only debutant captain keeper and number 11 in Test cricket history. And these two were doing it. A huge crowd in South Africa cheered on every single run. With 8 left, Sherwell edged between slips for 4. Straight after, Norse ran a 3. England bowled 3 dots. All they needed was 1 wicket to tie. Instead, a leg side full toss, boundary, game over. This was Test cricket's first one-wicket win, and their last partnership was a record for almost 100 years. But it was also something else. This was the first Test match that South Africa had ever won. Buy my book on Amazon, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire.